What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 321. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas, LSV. How goes, sir?
Pretty good, pretty good. And we're sure this is episode 321.
I am sure that this is episode number 3. You tried. Look, you get points for effort, but you can't sneak one by me, buddy. I'm just too good.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
So set reviews are now in our rear view mirrors, but that means that it's time to start looking forward to Oath of the Gatewatch Draft as a format, and of course limited and sealed and everything else as well. So this, of course, is going to be our first impression show. We've had a chance to get our hands on the cards, get some pre-releases, release events, some drafts in, and we're going to start giving you some of those early updates. You know, as you know, many of you that listen all the time to Limited Resources, you know that the set reviews are our starting point, and then we evolve over time. And a lot of what the first few shows after a set comes out are involved with that. We're kind of telling you these are the things that we're seeing as we learn more about the format.
Yeah, one of the things I love the most about doing this, you know, I've been on for over a year now, is seeing us take the listeners through kind of our evolution of the format, what we think. Sometimes we dial back. Sometimes we're like, hey, we were wrong about this, or hey, actually this is going in a different direction than we thought. But you kind of get to see our week-to-week progress on the format, which I at the very least like having there, you know, be a documented history of where we're at. So, which is I think pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it makes it. I think it makes these early shows really relevant to people that are trying to grasp the format quickly because we all kind of learn it together. So that's what we're going to be talking about on the show this week. We've got multiple crack-a-packs from Oath of the Gatewatch lined up and some general thoughts and discussion that we've got. Before we get into everything, though, I want to remind you that Limited Resources is brought to you by Channel Fireball. Now, the first thing is we're going to be talking about Oath of the Gatewatch on the show this week. And hey, it's in stock. You can get it right now at channelfireball.com. You can get, a whole bunch of different configurations of sealed product. You can even just get a booster box or whatever it is that you need to run some drafts with your friends at home. You can find it on Channel Fireball. If you need singles from Oath of the Gatewatch, if you're a constructed player, maybe you've got a Canadian Highlander deck or a Commander deck or whatever it is, you can find them all on channelfireball.com. I also want to remind you about Grand Prix Houston. We're starting to look forward a little bit towards the end of February. In about a month's time, February 26th through 28th, GP Houston is going to happen. There's about 1,700 seats left. It's a capped event, so if you're going to go, you want to make sure that you get your seat and go pre-register on gphouston.com, and it is going to be standard. So it's going to be a relatively young standard format there in Houston, and yeah, I'm going to be there. Luis, you're going to be there?
I am. We've got the whole cast of Limited Resources there, along with Gabby Sparks as the third commentator. So should be fun time. The view from the booth is always a good one.
Yeah, so that'll be cool. And, good chance to come up and say hi to us if you're into that. You can also support the show directly via Patreon, patreon.com/limited resources. You can check out all the cool little perks you can get. It's real easy to set up, and it's a great way to give back to the things that you love. And if the show happens to be one of them, well, there you go. One of the things that you get from being a patron is you can submit questions for questions of the week, and I have one here. This one's a little bit long, so I'm going to kind of cut to the chase, but this one comes from our listener, Chris, who used to play Magic back in the 90s and has recently gotten back into it when Chris's son, Dylan, who's 12, started getting into Magic over the last couple of years. Now, the question is, Chris's son Dylan has some talent for the game, and Chris is, sort of looking and watching his son as he gets more and more involved with Magic and, does other, kid stuff and everything. His son's athletic, and he's looking to, make sure that his son stays well-rounded. So he says, and Luis, this is mainly aimed at you, I'll say this as well. He says, having seen a lot of people devote their lives to the game for years at a time, what advice do you have for Dylan as a kid getting serious about Magic at a relatively young age? How do you balance being a kid, or a person really, he says, with a game that we know can completely absorb you? Is there a path that you can recommend where Dylan could play high-level competitive Magic, even at a fairly young age, and still maintain that balance? He also adds that he appreciates us keeping Limited Resources clean and appropriate for kids. You're welcome for that. That is something that Ryan and I decided way back in the day before when we were brainstorming for the show, that we wanted to make sure to keep the show friendly for all ages, just because we wanted to make sure that it could hit the widest audience possible, and young people play Magic as well. And so, you're welcome for that one. So, Luis, you've been in this position, right? Where you've, had your life immersed in Magic for, years long stretch when you were, on the Pro Tour full time, working for Channel Fireball full time, and just doing Magic stuff. What advice would you have for a young person who's kind of coming into Magic and wants to play competitively, but maybe still wants to have a well-rounded lifestyle?
This is a really interesting question. I think it's a great question. So I guess a little bit of my Magic history. I did learn to play when I was 11, so not that different from Dylan here. But I didn't really get serious for a long time. And in fact, I took a break in high school. So from when I was, 15 till about 19 or so, I didn't really play. And part of that was because I wanted to focus on school, and my parents wanted me to focus on school because I was spending too much time playing Magic, and to the detriment of my schooling. And so I kind of finished out high school not really playing Magic. I only really got into it again in my second year of college. And then after a while, started going to PTQs, and then eventually got on the Pro Tour. And let me tell you, Magic does take a lot of time. It's really easy to kind of be, consumed by it. And it's funny because I don't regret pretty much anything about like where I am right now and what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing so much. I love all the people I know. It's awesome. But I also don't know that it would have been good if I was playing Magic like my whole time in high school. Like sometimes I think like, man, I could have played on the Pro Tour 10 years earlier, because maybe I could have. I mean, who knows? Mm-hmm. But I don't really regret not doing so. I think that trying to keep a good balance in life is really important. Like, one of the things we joke about is like, we like playing basketball. We like, I like going hiking, like doing a lot of things that aren't just Magic, because as great as Magic is, and it is great, it is, I think, the greatest game ever made. I don't think that you're going to be the best person you can be if you just do one thing, or even if you just do two things or anything like that. So having balance is really important. That being said, it's really hard to master something without spending a lot of time on it. And honestly, I've found a lot of satisfaction in my life in mastering things. And, I think I've mastered Magic in a lot of ways, and I'm really happy about that, because it's satisfying, even without looking at any of the rewards, just to know that I'm really good at this thing. Like, it's hard to be really good at things. There's not very many things I consider myself really good at. Really, Magic and like kind of like speaking in terms of like podcasts or commentary or videos are the two things I think I'm really like the best at. And it's empowering to be awesome at something. And a lot of times in my life, it's made me feel a lot better when I didn't have a lot going on or was having trouble with things, to know that I'm really good at this thing, and I have the capability of being good at something. It's hard to get that without spending a lot of time, and trying to figure out that balance is really, I think, a personal question. My advice is not to go all in on any one thing. It sounds like, this kid here, and obviously a lot of other people have, this kid has a lot of balance going on right now. But if what he wants to do is spend a lot of time playing Magic and getting better at it, as long as you're taking care of the other things in your life, I think that's not a bad thing. I mean, you have like a lot of time every week, right? And even if you count school and homework, even if you look at the time apart from that, you still have, at the very least, a couple hours each day plus the weekends. That's a lot of time for activities. You don't need to be playing Magic 50 hours a week, but I would say a high school student could probably play Magic for 20 hours a week and not be destroying their life by any stretch. And that's still a lot of time added up, right? So,
yeah, for sure.
I don't know. It's a tough question. I do strive for balance. I do recommend balance, but I know what it's like to be consumed by something and spend a lot of time on it. I mean, how many hours of Magic do you think I played? If you count all the like time playing, thinking about, talking about it, like is it? I mean, it's over 20,000. Is it like how much more than that?
Right.
So it's tricky to figure out where that balance should be, and it's hard to master something without spending a ton of time on it. But I'm also not saying that it has to be Magic that you master. There's a lot of things in life that are worth mastering, and you have to figure out what makes the most sense for your life. So
yeah,
I hope that wasn't too much of a non-answer. It is a tricky thing, but finding what makes you happy is really important, as long as you're doing it in a responsible way. So
yeah, I mean, it's a personal decision, right? I mean, that's kind of at the heart of what you're saying is like it worked for you, right? Because one thing that was important for you, was to become the best at something, right? And there was a stretch of time where you were the best Magic player in the world, and you're considered one of the best Magic players ever to play the game, and that's special. That really is special. Like, I think that, like that's something that you had to work really hard for, apply yourself, get through things. And you can really look back on that with a sense of pride because you earned that. And I think there's a lot to be gained there. The advice I would give, to Dylan would be, while he's still young, to make sure that he's trying out everything, right? Yes, play Magic, but also get out there and play basketball and try cooking and, whatever things that capture your imagination, photography, try them, because you might find that you are somebody who can have multiple hobbies or passions going at the same time, and Magic can be one of them. But don't be afraid to dive deep on one. That's been something that I've done in my life as well. I tend to find something and really, really go deep on it. And I find that deeply satisfying. I think that's an awesome way to approach it. The other piece of advice I would give to Dylan is that if he does find himself in a position where he's, really deep on Magic or anything else, is to keep tabs on it. It's easy to let that slip a little bit, where you do lose that balance. And that actually usually makes you worse at the thing that you're really going deep on, and worse at everything else too. So if you, take a moment every, week or month or whatever to kind of reflect and just ask yourself, look, am I doing the things that I want to be doing? Is this good for me? Am I, moving down a line of a path that I'm happy with what the ending of that path looks like? And if you're like, I am, this is where I want to be, this is what I want to do, then keep doing it. But there might be a time where you're like, I'm really not feeling it right now. And you need to introduce a little bit of balance to kind of even things out. So yeah, I don't think you should be afraid to follow your passions and go super deep, but at the same time, it does do you right to to keep that in mind as you work your way down that path. Thanks so much for the question, Chris. I agree. Super cool question. Not along the lines of what we normally get, but a really good one. And Dylan, keep it up, man. You got the skills. We'll see you on the Pro Tour soon. Okay, Luis, it's time to crack our first pack of Oath of the Gatewatch. Are you ready for this?
I was born ready.
So this one actually
that's not true, but I am ready now.
You were not born ready for Oath of the Gatewatch. So our first one is actually a pack that was given to me at the Super Sunday series this last weekend from the Bulgarian Magic community. So thank you so much to the Bulgarian Magic. Apparently we have a nice contingent of listeners out there, and we wanted to give a shout out to them. Thank you so much for the booster. And let's see what we get. All right. Well, our first card is one that if we had to stop my collection right now at card most drafted, it would be this one. It's a Cultivator Drone. That's the 2 and a blue 2/3, and it taps to add colorless, but you can only use the colorless for colorless spells, activated abilities of colorless permanents, or things that require specifically colorless mana.
Cultivator Drone's a great card.
It's solid. Yeah.
One of the best blue commons. It's one of the most important cards in the set, actually, I think, in terms of how do the themes play out at common and where do they push you. So I would already be happy first picking Cultivator Drone. I think I'm at the point where I'm not saying that's my ideal first pick. I'm not saying hey, I dream of a day where I could first pick a Cultivator Drone. It's more like I dream of, having Cultivator Drone in my deck. So if you have to first pick it, it's a fine thing.
Yeah. The last, I've done 2 drafts. The last one I did had 4 of these in it. And I got to say, they were pretty darn good. The next one is Brute Strength. So that's the 1 in a red instant. It gives a creature +3/+1 and trample until end of turn.
I've been mildly impressed with the card. It does a lot of damage. It's a combat trick that's okay at saving your creatures, but really good at pushing through the last, 4 to 6 points of damage. So certainly not first picking it, but I will let you know that this is a card you're going to die to fairly often. Yeah,
I agree. Especially against Scion-sized chump blockers, Brute Strength really can punch through a ton of damage. Alpha Protector is next. That's a 2 and a white 1/4 with Vigilance. It's also an ally.
This is a decent card. I think the fact that it blocks well, it can plink in for a point of damage without tapping, so it combines with Cohort. Yeah, I mean, again, not first pick material, but not a card I think you're going to play a good amount of the time. Not all the time, but a good amount.
Yeah. Next is Saddleback Legak.
Saddleback Legak.
Yeah.
This card has really impressed me. It is, I think, one of the early winners. If you go 2-drop, 3-drop Saddleback, then you're going to win that game a lot of the time, especially on the play.
Yeah, it's the 3 and a green for a 3/1 lizard, and when it enters a battlefield, you support 2.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the reasons aggro's kind of back. So, more on that later. But I wouldn't take it over a Cultivator Drone. I think Cultivator Drone is still better, but Saddleback is a pretty critical card, and I wouldn't be surprised if it just keeps creeping up in the pick order.
Yeah, I wouldn't be either. Corpse Churn. This is 1 and a black instant. Put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, and then you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah, this is filler. I'm not taking it this early.
I have a very sad... Do you want to hear a sad story about Corpse Churn?
Not really, but go for it.
I think you do.
It's fine. It's fine.
You'll like it. You'll like it a lot, actually. I was playing in a side draft. This was actually against Sam Black, the eventual winner of the Super Sunday series. This was more of a late night post-dinner style draft. And I had passed a turn back to Sam, who said, let's see what happens. And he plays Corpse Churn. Now, in his graveyard at the time, there was a Pilgrim's Eye. That was it.
Okay.
So the first card he flips is, like a land or whatever. The next card was a Grove Tender Druids. So he's like, okay. And then the next card was Baloth Null Drifter. And that was the one that he returned to his hand, and then returned to the other 2 creatures to his hand, and I didn't win that game. That seems to be a pretty ideal case, though, for Corpse Churn, and I think, generally speaking, this is a card you probably prefer to have in your sideboard.
Yeah, it seems... Again, Baloth Null Drifter is a card that would make me want to put this in my deck, or just having like really high quality creatures. But in general, I don't think that you're really looking to take this card, and you're going to get them late.
Yeah. Canopy Gorger, 4GG for a 6/5. Saw one of those sideboarded in, otherwise haven't had any experience with or against it yet.
Yeah.
Meh.
I would say so. I mean,
it's just like whatever, right? Like it's still, I don't know. It doesn't seem to be occupying some important space in the metagame here.
No, especially since the 5/4 ally with trample to do Pathwarden. That's the kind of card I want as my big green creature slot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. This next one's interesting. I'm curious to hear your story on it. If you've played with or against Seer's Lantern, the 3 colorless artifact that taps for a colorless, and you can pay 2 colorless, tap it to scry and scry 1.
2 generic tap.
Sorry, yeah. You can pay 2 mana, tap it, and then scry 1.
I think this card is a necessary evil. I have not seen anyone put it in their deck and be happy with it as just a scrying mechanism or to ramp. But if you're fixing your mana, if you're actually playing a deck that needs Wingding's colorless mana sources, then this card does, as advertised, it does help you cast, your Thought-Knot Seer or your Reality Smasher or whatever card you have in that vein, or activate maybe your Blinding Drones. So
sure.
I suspect I will not be playing this card outside of a colorless deck or one that specifically wants colorless, but in that deck, it is an option.
So my only experience was against Seer's Lantern, and I have to say it did wreck me. I found myself in a stalled board state against my opponent, who activated it, 3, 4, 5 times, scrying in the late part of the game, and the card was an absolute all-star in that scenario because they were just drawing, spells, and I was drawing, 60% spells or whatever. So, I did find, the late game scenario where it really shone and seemed good. Also, feedback, not from me, because I haven't played Seer's Lantern yet, but Matt Severa, who's a known limited player out of Wisconsin, he said he's quite happy to have the first one of these in his control decks, like in his decks that he's looking to make the game go long. He says that the first Seer's Lantern is a welcome addition. So
yeah, I can buy that. I mean, control decks want this effect a lot more.
Yeah. Here's the next one: Oblivion Strike. It's got to be one of the better commons.
This is just the best common. No,
it's the best common?
It's not one of the better commons. This is 3 and a black, sorcery, exile target creature.
Yeah.
It's just too efficient. I mean, sure, it's 4 mana, so I guess, right, efficient's the wrong word. It's too effective. If it was 3 mana, it'd be insane, but at 4 mana, it still kills things that cost 4 more mana, kills them dead. They don't get die triggers. They don't get to bring them back. If you want, you can process them if you have the cards from Battle for Zendikar. So right now, I'm taking Oblivion Strike out of this pack.
Yeah, I am too.
It's also even splashable, so I really have nothing bad to say about this card. There's not really a limit of how many I would want.
Spawnbinder Mage. This is the 3 and a white 2/4 human wizard ally with cohort tap a creature.
Yeah, this card I'm really curious exactly where it fits because I've drafted what I think I've drafted 3 times so far, and I've watched all the drafts because one of the things as a brief aside when we're practicing in the beginning of the format especially we'll do draft as if it's an 8-player draft like you're not hate drafting, you're not doing anything like that, but then split into random teams so that you help your teammates build their decks and you watch all their matches and so you get a lot more experience that way because watching my teammate build their deck and talking about what their card choices really does help. We find it's better learning than just doing individual drafts.
That makes sense, yeah.
But in any case, Spawnbinder Mage has been one of the cards that's been hard to really figure out where it lands because in the like defensive black-white ally life gain cohort deck, which I think is a very real thing, it does what you need to do in that it stops their best creature. The problem is it costs 2 of yours.
Yes. And
that's not very efficient. It's also a 4-mana 2/4, which is fine, but definitely not better than fine. So I've had mixed experiences. So I think this card is going to end up being like a kind of middle of the pack card, but the range definitely goes higher than that. And I could see you wanting the first Spawnbinder Mage pretty badly. They do get bad in multiples because again, it gets the cost is high enough that you can't afford to use many of them. But having one of these in your black-white deck it gives you outs to their 7-8.
Yeah, and from what I've seen from the black-white deck as well is that it does a really good job of sort of mucking up everything, especially on the ground. And I'm wondering if it'll be the case that more often than not, you do just happen to have an extra ally around that you don't mind using with your Spawnbinder Mage and still not taking a ton of damage. I've been impressed by it so far. The deck wants to slow down, so the 2/4 body is amenable to that anyway. A 2/3 and a 2/4 on the ground are pretty dang tough to attack into with any of the 2, 3, and 4 mana creatures that you'll see in the format. So yeah, I think I got my eye on it. I think it's actually pretty good. But the key point being what you said, it does take 2 of your creatures effectively to tap down 1. Interestingly, I had a similar situation with a cultivator drone and what's called a blinding drone. Similar thing where I'm tapping 2 of my creatures to tap down 1 of yours. And there's some board states that allow you to do that, and there's some that are a little bit less amenable to that. So we'll keep an eye on Spawnbinder Mage. I mean, I still like Oblivion Strike over it.
Oh yeah, I don't think that particularly close. I would take Cultivator Drone over to Spawnbinder as well.
Yeah, agree. Zada's Commando. This is the 1 and a red 2/1 with first strike, and you can cohort to do 1 damage to target opponent.
This card also very, very good.
I think so too.
If you play this on turn 2, it's going to usually get like 4 to 6 points of damage in, just because what can block it.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, it pinging for 1 is very good. I have come across more board stalls than normal, and cards like Zada's Commando really help out there. So a card that's good early and good late is a great blocker. All those things together make this a pretty high priority 2-drop. Still have this behind Oblivion Strike and Cultivator Drone, but I have it above Spawnbinder Mage.
Agree. Yeah, I love the early and the late thing on it. So here's our first uncommon. Cliffhaven Vampire. This is the 2 white-black 2/4 flying vampire warrior ally, and whenever you gain a life, each opponent loses 1 life.
Yeah, this card great. It's a 4-mana 2/4 flyer. Nothing wrong with that. And it combines well with cards like Vampire Cohort or Vampire Envoy and Colostrum Healer from Battle for Zendikar. Just a couple.
Yeah. And what's
all the random.
What's the cohort gain 2 life ally called? I keep forgetting.
Undo War Cleric.
Oh, thank you.
1 and a white 2/2 cohort gain 2.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Just all those cards together mean that Cliffhaven Vampire is going to play more like a 4-mana 2/4 flyer that also just deals 1 to 2 extra damage a turn, or 1 to 2 extra damage every couple turns. I mean, it depends on your deck, obviously. But even if you quote unquote miss and don't have a single card that says life gain on it, it's still great. Yeah,
we speculated in the set review about the 2/4 flying just being a great blocker in these decks that can kind of set up these grindy win conditions. And I did have a chance to play against a Cliffhaven Vampire. I haven't had one myself. But when I did, it did exactly that. It was just it stayed back to block, and the grind was on. I was losing life to the Cliffhaven Vampire and maybe some other combination of cohort or, recurring activated ability. And this guy certainly held his own. I was quite impressed by it. That being said, I still like Oblivion Strike as a pack 1, pick 1 better than it. Make a Stand is our next uncommon. It's 2 and a white instant. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. I have not played with or against this one yet. Have you had a chance to, Luis?
No.
Have you made your stand yet?
I haven't. It wasn't one of my teammates' decks, and it was fine. but
Okay.
it's not exciting. Like, it is better in the board style games, so I think it's probably like a notch higher than maybe we gave it credit for, just because way more often than in Battle for Zendikar, you're going to end up with like 4+ creatures on each side, and this can be like a 3 or 4 for one if things line up correctly. But yeah, I'm still not taking this very highly.
How about this? I want to, because there's a type of card, I haven't come up with a good name for it yet, but it's kind of like, when you see it. And the type of card I'm talking about
that's a good name for it. Yeah.
Is the one that you put in your deck and you're hoping to get a 1-for-1 out of it, right? You're like, all right.
I try not to play those cards.
Me too. But, occasionally you find yourself in those situations. Some combat tricks are like that. Some of the, some defensive combat tricks too can be like that. Think of like God's Willing or cards that give your creature protection from something. There's a bunch of different, sideboard style cards that are like that too. Does Make a Stand fall into that camp where you're like, you got it in your opening hand and you're like kind of trying to manufacture a scenario where you can get your card worth of value out of it?
Make a Stand falls into the category of narrow card with high upside. And those cards are often what you're talking about. They're the cards where like Royal Mage's Trick, right? The -X/-O draw card. That's the card where if you trade that for a card, I mean, that's a 2-for-1, I guess. But if you end up getting a card out of it, you're happy. And the upside is really high. Like Make a Stand, most of the times you draw it, I don't think you're going to quite get a card out of it. And if you do, you're like, all right, that was fine. Because every 5th time or whatever, you get like 4 cards out of it. So I like narrow cards with a good high end, and Make a Stand kind of fits in that category. Whereas a lot of the combat tricks, like the mediocre combat tricks, like, Swell of Growth from Battle for Zendikar, the 2 mana +2/+2, you can play a land.
Yeah.
That's exactly the kind of card where if you trade that for a card, you're like, all right, we did it.
You're sweet. Yeah. You blank a burn spell with it. It was going to kill your creature or something. You're like, yeah. It lets you run over another creature. Right. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not super high on Make a Stand. We'll see if I change my mind on that. Visions of Brutality. Now, this card certainly lives up to its name. It's the 1 in a black. Well, it's the pacifism, right? That's what everybody's calling it, the black pacifism. It's 1 in a black, devoid enchant creature. Enchanted creature can't block, and whenever it deals damage, its controller loses that much life.
This card's very good.
It's very good.
It also is somewhat situational. If you put this in your control deck, you're not going to be happy with the results.
No.
It's just not going to do very much for you. You're not attacking, and your opponent's going to like, all right, I'll take 3 if you take 3. That's a good deal.
Yeah.
But I one of the decks at the table was a red-black aggro deck, and it was just always pacifism. Like, It's got some of the drawbacks where your opponent might be able to maneuver a situation where they can attack, but for the most part, it is just pacifism. Like, your opponent can't block with it, because that's what it says in the card, and they just can't afford to attack with it. They're just, if they attack and deal 3 and you take 3, but, your opponent's at 13 and you're at 19, it's just not a very good deal. And if you can consistently up the pressure, it's good. So I wouldn't be thrilled with taking this early, because I think even if it's got 2 different things you have to satisfy to put in your deck. One is you have to stay in the right color. You have to stay black, which you're just not always going to do, right? You first pick a black card, sometimes you end up white-green. So it has to meet that qualification, which is true of basically every card, but is worth noting. And the second one is you have to be aggressive. So having to jump through 2 hoops is a little bit more than I want to, but if you're like, say, looking like you're going to be red-black aggro, I would first pick this in pack 2 without thinking too much about it.
I agree. Yeah, every time I've had that played on me, which was admittedly only in sealed, but when it's happened and I was getting beaten down, I looked at it like, wow, that is just straight up pacifism, and that's a very high praise, for a 2-mana removal spell. It's one of the better ones in the set if you can back it up. All right, our rare. It is Ruins of Oran-Reef.
This one's good. So it's a land that comes into play tapped.
Yeah.
Taps for a colorless.
Yeah.
Or you can tap it to put a ++1 counter on target colorless creature that entered the battlefield this turn.
That's right. That's good. I mean, we liked it in the review a lot.
Yeah. But part of the, the reason, and I think people might overestimate how much we like the lands, because like we understand what we're saying when we talk about how lands are awesome. But
yes.
Let me clarify. We're talking about lands compared to other lands. Like putting this in your deck when you have a normal, like you can afford it and you have a mana base that works with it is awesome. Lands that do things are just like having an extra spell in your deck. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean we're taking Runes of Oran-Reef over Oblivion Strike. I mean, I don't think I would.
I'm not at all. No way.
Yeah. So I would love to have this card in my deck, and if you get it like 4th or 5th pick in pack 1 and you're already like heading down the colorless path, it's a great card. You're going to get, if you have this in your opening hand, you'll get 2 or 3 counters out of it, which is a great deal because it still just taps for mana. Basically, anytime a land does something other than tap for mana, it's almost like a 2-for-1 just right there, assuming the other thing is worth a card.
Yeah, which, and this one's repeatable.
Yeah, this eventually becomes worth a card. It probably takes 3 activations, then you kind of feel like you drew a card. And it could be less if things line up nicely, right? If it makes it so your 2/2 fights past their 3/3 and gets 6 extra damage in, yeah, you're talking about something substantial there. I still don't think I'm just taking it over the best common, and I don't even think I would take it over a Cultivator Drone. Actually, I might take this over Cultivator Drone. I think it's about that level. So
I certainly would at this point because I want to figure it out. You know,
I mean, the thing is, you don't get ruined if it doesn't end up working out. It's you didn't commit that much to it. Like you can put this in a lot of different decks. So I would start by taking this below Oblivion Strike, and I guess by extension Isolation Zone, the white version, right? The 2 white exile a creature enchantment. But I would take it above like the C+ level commons, which is I think about where Cultivator Drone hits, maybe C+, maybe B-, but either way, or Runes of Oran Reef goes a little higher than that.
Yeah.
And we've talked many times. I'll bring it up again. At the beginning of the format, take rares because you'll have less opportunities to take them and play with them. I would advise you to take rares when you don't know what their power level is. I mean, I'm not saying take a mediocre rare over a clearly great uncommon or common, but I'm saying when you've got a good-ish rare and a good-ish common, just default to the rare.
You know, I could see Runes of Oran Reef being really good with like Hedron Scrabbler. Is that what it's called? Scrabbler? You know, where you're kind of a mana ahead anyway, and you can afford to activate the Runes of Oran Reef, you know, on most or all of your creatures as you sort of work your way into your curve. Because, you know, that is a real downside, right? Like you're casting your 3-drop on turn 4, but it's bigger. So like ostensibly it makes up for the difference by being bigger, but you know, it does kind of make you do some kind of weird things with your with your curve. All right, so you and I, though, are both on Oblivion Strike for this first pack. Now, we've got another one lined up here. Also, I would remind you that the rares that we open in these packs go back to you, the listeners. They get given away to a random patron. So, you know, well, once every month and a half, once the pile looks like it's about big and juicy enough, then we'll give it away. And we also... it
goes to a random patron or co-host, right?
No, that's...
It's like 50-50, whether it's to a patron or a co-host.
No.
If it rolls patron, then it's, each patron has equal chances.
That's not how that works.
And if it rolls co-host, well, there's only one co-host currently.
Well, I think the listeners have seen what you do with your opened rares. You throw them on the ground or whatever. And you also, though, if you do happen to win that, not you, Luis, you get a limited resources T-shirt. And you get some sleeves and a button. And I've also got a box
the T-shirt doesn't come with sleeves. You have to get them separately.
And buttons, yeah. I've also got a box of cool stuff from Channel Fireball. They gave me a whole bunch of sleeves and deck boxes and pens and stuff like that I'm figuring out the right packaging to send them in, and then I'm going to be giving away a bunch of that to our patrons as well here on the show. So anyway, I wanted to mention that before we move on to Crack Pack number 2. That's right. We're doing another one. We like to do a couple of them.
It's really Crack 2 early.
Yes, that is what it is here. All right. So let's get into this. Oh, and one other thing I should mention too is that I do put up all these Cracker Packs on the Limited Resources blog on LRcast. So if you want to vote, you can. Like, it's fun to kind of just chime in and you can see what you would do. Also, I put them up the same time I put the show up. So if you see the shows on your on your phone or your computer or however you listen to it, you can go to the blog and check out the Crack a Pack and vote for it. Now, obviously, you'll know what's in the pack ahead of time, which is a little bit of spoiler alert, but you can also kind of work your way through it yourself, and then you can hear what Luis and I have to say about it afterwards. I know a few of our listeners do that, so just thought I'd let you know. All right. Our first card out of our second Crack a Pack here for Oath of the Gatewatch is Core Scythe Master. That's the 2 and a white 3/1, and it has first strike as long as it's attacking. It's also an ally.
So,
it hits pretty hard.
You know what's surprising about this card?
What's that?
It's good if you're aggressive and not that good if you're not.
Yeah. You were shocked by that revelation.
3/1s make surprisingly good blockers.
They do.
it might seem counterintuitive, but one of the disadvantages of a normal 3/1, not this one, of course, is that they trade for 1/1s, but if you keep them back, they could trade for a 3/3 or 4/3.
Mm-hmm.
This one doesn't trade for 1/1s when it's attacking because it just cuts them down and still blocks all right on defense. This card is good. I mean,
yeah, I think it's totally
fine. It's not first pick good. It is definitely. No. I'm very unhappy if I'm first picking this, but it's still a fine card.
I respect it. Yeah, and we'll talk about after we're done with this Crackerback some of the things that we've seen, but I've definitely seen people beating down, and this was a part of that plan. Negate. Nah.
Yeah, I'm not taking it, but I don't mind main decking this card actually.
Oh, you're on main decking it?
Definitely not always.
Okay.
This is not me a blanket bequeathal of responsibility where you can always just main deck negate and not worry about it. But I had a deck that had like 19 creatures in it, so I had 19 creatures and 2 removal spells and a negate, and it felt pretty good because when your deck's all creatures, then sometimes you're just gonna be able to leave mana up because you have 5 creatures in play already, and negate's good in those kind of situations.
Okay, yeah, I got destroyed by a negate, I will say. Spark Mage's Gambit is 1 and a red for a sorcery. It deals 1 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures, and those creatures can't block this turn. I'll tell you what, Luis, I haven't seen this one go yet.
I've been happy with this.
Yeah.
I had a blue-red control / surge deck, and this performed fairly well.
Wow, really?
It picks off Hedron Crawlers. It picks off Core Scythe Masters. There's just... The thing is, don't think about this card as needing to get a 2-for-1 to be good. If it gets a 1-for-1 with a real card, you're already even with the game. And you're ahead of the game. If you kill 2 things, you're way ahead. There's also like a decent amount of 2/1s. And then if you're an aggressive deck, which I wasn't, so I didn't use it for this method, but even in a control deck, you might run into it. You can make 2 of their 4/4s unable to block and kill them.
Totally. So, I mean, would you prefer this thing in an aggressive deck or in a deck like you were describing, a little more kind of tempo control?
It's pretty contextual. Like, part of the reason I thought it was great in my deck is because I had Pyromancer's Assault, which, by the way, I think is good.
Sweet. Good.
That's the 3 in a red enchantment when you play your second spell, deal 2. And
God, I hope it's good.
It's great with Spark Mage's Gambit, right?
Because you can add up extra damage.
Doing 1 and 1 when you're also getting to deal 2 is so good because you can like kill a 3/3 and a 2/1 or set it. Basically, you get to set it up so that like once I got to kill a 3/2 and 2 2/1s by playing this and then just like another spell.
Dear God.
And
this is cheap enough for you for it to be one of 2 cards that you play in a turn at only 2 minutes.
Yeah, it is. So I'm not saying go out and first pick this card. I'm not even saying you always run it because I don't think you do. But I'm just saying I've had good experiences with it so far. It's kind of like Boiling Earth. When the format came out, Boiling Earth was not a card I gave much stock. Mm-hmm. I thought, okay, maybe I'll sideboard this in. Turned out I'd always main deck one. Spark Mage's Gambit I think is worse than Boiling Earth, but still in the same vein of like, yeah, this is a decent effect, and if you don't have access to it, 1 copy of it's probably decent.
Okay. Pulse of Marasa. This card's gone up a lot for me, Luis. 2 and a green instant. Return a creature or land card from your graveyard to from a graveyard to its owner's hand, and you gain 6 life.
I have not played with her against this card.
I've been impressed by it, man.
Why have you liked it?
Well, I think it might be the real deal in these grindy decks. The 6 life is real. We both remarked in the set review that, wow, that's a lot, right? I mean, we were thinking this could have been 3 life and maybe something that you'd consider running sometimes, and maybe 4 life, and 6 is just like a big jump. And, I was talking to some of the pros at the Super Sunday series about it, and they agreed. They said that they thought, after having seen it for a little bit, that it might be the real deal as far as a card that you actually want the first of in a deck. We've seen just a lot of grinding, a lot of dead creatures, a lot of cards that care about enter the battlefield effects, and it turns out that the 6 life is actually real. So it's one that I have flagged, right? I'm not 100% convinced yet. That it's amazing or anything, but I think it might be right on that cusp of being a card that you're pretty cool with playing one of in your deck.
Yeah, it does not seem like a card that gets better in multiples, but it does seem like a card which I'm willing to give more of a try to.
Untamed Hunger is next. It's 2 and a black. It's an enchantment. The enchanted creature gets +2/+1 and has menace.
I'm not willing to give this one more of a try.
Nope, me neither.
I've even had it played against me, and it was atrocious. So that reinforced my belief.
Yeah. Vines of the Recluse is green instant. Target creature gets +1/+2 and gains reach until in a turn. Untap it. We like this one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not amazing, but like the price is right for what you're getting,
No,
right?
I think most green decks are going to be happy with playing one of these, maybe even
Yeah.
two, just because it's so efficient. Have you come up on Unnatural Endurance yet?
A little bit, but I
Yeah.
mean, what did I give it? A D plus, a D?
I think you gave it a different grade than Vines, and I think it's better than Vines, which that's the only part I found a little funny.
Yeah, I might have been inconsistent there. I do think it's better than
I
Vines
think
as well.
it was also like the last card nurse that review.
Yeah, might have just been
getting
off
close
it
to
at that point. Yeah.
Look, you in fact were not possessing Unnatural Endurance.
Well played. Yeah, but at any rate, we're not first picking Vines here, right? I mean, this is a card that's, catches your eye, but none of these have been ones I've wanted. This next one, I've seen do some good work. Expedition Raptor, the 3/white 2/2 flying, and when it enters the battlefield, you support 2. Support has been generally good from what I've seen. The effect is immediate. The creatures have stayed around for the most part on most of the games that I've watched and played in. This doesn't seem to be the format where, you play something that's gone, you play something that's gone, and then you play your Expedition Raptor into an empty board. It's generally going to hit 2 targets. Remember, it doesn't hit itself. And it leaves behind a reasonable 2/2 body, which is really good for supporting onto after that. So, yeah, I think Expedition Raptor's good. But again, this doesn't catch my eye as a first pick quality card.
I agree. It's a card you will want in a lot of your white decks, but it's also a 5-drop that
you want one.
I think you can get other replacements for. It's a good card though. If you have a 17 plus creature deck, you're just going to play your Expedition Raptors and they're going to be good.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I've seen. The support cards, with the exception of the 2/white 3/2 that supports for 100 or whatever, that one has been really impressive. But all the ones that have support 2, I've been like, okay, that pulled its weight. I haven't been like, holy crap, but I've been like, yeah, that was good enough to to make the cut every time or whatever. And I think Expedition Raptor's in that group. We got another Zada's Commando here, Luis. That was the 2/1 first strike for 1 and a red. So another card that catches my eye. I mean, here, let's just, before we get into the next few, like, what are we actually taking out of this pack currently? Is it?
I think it's the Zada's Commando.
Yeah, I think so too. All right.
I mean, I'm not excited at this point, but
no.
Zada's Commando feels like just below the point where you're happy to first pick it. Like or rather satisfied. Like if I have to first pick a Zada's Commando, I'm going to grumble a little bit, but I'm not going to be like, oh, that sucked.
And by the way, Zada's Commando, like text box wise, looks a lot like an uncommon, right? First strike with like a cohort ability.
Cohort does, because it's a keyword, it does kind of get to sell you a higher rarity card at a lower rarity because they're already assuming like, hey, this complexity is already just, we're good with this at common. It is not counting against you.
Yeah.
But the fact that it has an additional keyword on top is a real thing.
Yeah. Crumbling Vestige is the land that enters the battlefield tap, but you can get 1 mana of any color when it enters the battlefield, and it taps for colorless.
Yeah, it's a fine card. It's not
been fine.
We're going to talk more about colorless later, but I'm not at the point where I'm first picking colorless lands just in case.
No, me neither. But this has been one of the better, waste upgrades, I think, that I've seen. Containment Membrane, the 2 and a blue enchant creature. The creature doesn't untap during his controller's untap step. It's also got Surge for blue. I've played a fair bit of these already, and I've been impressed by this card, actually. I'm actually a pretty big fan of Containment Membrane. I went in and coming out of the set review thinking that it actually wasn't going to be super strong just because, remember, it doesn't tap the creature down. It just keeps it that way. But every time I've played it, the creature stayed that way. And, I've been impressed by the surge cost of just 1 blue. It's a lot easier than I thought it would be to just shoehorn in a Containment Membrane into a relatively normal turn otherwise. And I actually like it. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, I have been impressed with Containment Membrane. I believe it is still worse than Zada's Commando as a first pick, but I think a lot of your blue decks are going to be happy playing even multiple Containment Membranes just because you can pay 1. You're stealing tempo. You're paying 1 mana for an effect that costs more than 1 mana, and if you get to on turn 5 to play a 4-drop and a Containment Membrane on their tapped attacker, that's a really good turn.
Yeah, and that happens. I got to say that the surge cost of just 1 mana is big. Like that's something to pay attention to.
Secondly, small, which is big.
Yes. All right, uncommons. Spatial Contortion is our first one. So now we get a real choice here. This is the one generic and one colorless instant. Target creature gets +3/-3 until end of turn. I mean, that's a real card. That's power-wise, it's much higher than the cards we've got here, right?
Right. It's essentially a lightning strike.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's 2 mana to deal 3. Can't directly deal damage to players, but if you played on an unblocked 4/4, I guess you're dealing your opponent 3. But let's just say in terms of creature removal, it's basically lightning strike.
Yep.
The problem is it's lightning strike in another color, in a 6th color.
Yeah.
A color you have to draft the mana sources for, and essentially most decks will be splashing. So I think first pick you're still probably on Zada's Commando, but this is one I'm less sure about, because if colorless is a place you're going to end up a good amount of the time and it's safe to do, then you can take the Spatial Contortion here.
Yeah. I would take it early here. I still haven't figured out quite, how many colorless sources I'm going to have. And I got to say, it's risky because Spatial Contortion, is really good at killing small to medium-sized threats. And if you're effectively splashing this card where you might not have the mana for it till turn 7, turn 8, turn 9, somewhere in that range, you'll probably get something with it. But if they play like an early flyer that's going to take a bunch of damage, or that's going to deal a bunch of damage to you, I mean, that's when you really want to fire off your Spatial Contortion. And there's going to be games when you don't get a chance to do that if you don't dedicate enough picks to colorless lands. Still, power level wise, this one I think is the highest power level that we've got so far. I like Zada's Commando, Containment Membrane, and Spatial Contortion as our contenders.
Those are our contenders for sure.
Our next uncommon is Flame Tendrils, the 1/1 sorcery with Devoid, and all creatures get -2/-2 on the turn, and if a creature would die this turn, you exile it instead. I don't like the way I would approach this is that I wouldn't take Flame Tendrils this early.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm willing. I mean, look, the power levels here, right? Like this thing has the highest ceiling of any of the cards that we've got in the pack, but I just don't think that we hit that ceiling very high with a card like this.
Yeah, I don't even know where this is going to land in terms of like, do you want this in your main deck? Even though, certainly this card has the highest ceiling. It can kill 5 creatures.
Yeah, exactly.
But it doesn't. The -2/-2 effect, I did not like it much in Battle for Zendikar. We had Rising Miasma, which in a lot of ways is a better card because you get to awaken it.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't constructed where you need to hit this effect on turn 3 against the decks you want it. Often you won't want to cast this on turn 3, so I'd rather have the other version, and that clearly was not a high pick. So this really is not in my consideration here.
I agree. Good sideboard card for later.
Oh, great sideboard card. And I think in a couple weeks we'll know whether you just main deck this in most of your decks or not.
Yeah, because there are formats that have been amenable to that. Step Glider is our last uncommon. This is the 4 and a white, 2/4 flying vigilance, and you can pay 1 and a white to give target creature with a +1/+1 counter on it, flying and vigilance until end of turn.
This card's fine.
I think it's good.
It's a step above Expedition Raptor, but it's not, a windmill slam. It might be better than Zada's Commando or Spatial Contortion, but I'm not even convinced of that. It probably is. It's probably.
I would take it over those cards if I knew I could cast Spatial Contortion, in reasonable time frame. Then I would take that over this. But I'm just not confident about this yet.
That's the joke, right?
Yeah, that is where they get you.
I mean, if we knew we could cast these colorless cards, we would just take them.
Yeah,
but
I don't. So
I think that the best picks here are the Step Glider, the Commando, and the Spatial Contortion.
Agreed.
Well, let's see what the rare is. I'm not sure yet. But.
Well, I think the rare will probably change your mind. The rare is Sylvan Advocate.
Yeah, I like this card a lot. This is
Me
1
too.
and a green for a 2/3 vigilance, and if you have 6 or more lands, Sylvan Advocate and land creatures you control get +2/+2.
Yeah,
This card's constructed puncher.
Great. Yeah, this is a card I would take out of this pack, no problem.
I would too. It's great. Anytime later in the game, it's a 2 mana 4/5, and that mana efficiency does matter. On turn 5, you get to play this and another spell on turn 5. Turn 6, play your 6 land and smash for 4/5
with vigilance. Right? Yeah, ugh.
It's also fine on turn 2. 2 mana 2/3 is a good deal.
Yeah, totally. With vigilance too, like it beats down, it blocks.
So, Sylvan Advocate definitely the front runner here. I really don't know about the other 3. I think they're all very close. Like Step Glider's good. But it is a 5-drop, and it's not like an amazing 5-drop, just a good 5-drop.
Oh, it's Step Gilder.
Yeah. Zada's Commando is also just like a very consistent card that you'll never be unhappy to have in your red decks, and you would want more of. Like, I'm actually leaning towards the Commando over the Glider just because it's safer to take a 2-drop first. You can, if you take a 2-drop first, you can take a 5-drop later. If you take a 5-drop first, you have to take a 2-drop later over a 5-drop, even if it's worse.
I agree.
So
yeah, I like it too.
But I also wouldn't blame you if you took Spatial Contortion, not over an Advocate. I'm assuming Advocate already got picked. But like if I had first picked Cultivator Drone, let's say I'm to your left, you first pick Sylvan Advocate. I first picked Cultivator Drone because that's just the pack I open. Then I'm just slamming the Spatial Contortion over the other two cards.
All day.
So Spatial Contortion is like a hair away from just being a good pick. First pick, I think you should probably take Zada's Commando overall. My guess is that's going to be again, Sylvan Advocate's gone, going to be our safest plan. I think Spatial Contortion might end up being an okay pick. It might be also the case that you find you really like the colorless decks and you are successful with them and you're okay committing to them. Pick one.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if that's the case, the Contortion does win out. But as the pack sits, Sylvan Advocate all the way. Okay, so there's that. We'll stop the Cracker Pack train at 2 for this week. Maybe we'll do 2 more next week or something, or we'll see what's up. But let's get into our first impressions here, Luis. Some of the things, I had a chance to watch quite a few draft matches play out over the course of the weekend because the Super Sunday Series, the first 3 rounds were a booster draft of this format. And in fact, the top 8 was also a booster draft of this format. And then in between all of the shenanigans there, everybody was drafting the whole time. So I got a chance to talk to Reed Duke, to Neil Oliver, to Sam Black about some of their thoughts on it. Matt Severa I mentioned as well. And then I got a chance to draft a couple of times myself too. So, I'm starting to form my initial pictures, but I'm still, things are they're not fully in focus yet. But one of the things that stood out to me, playing and watching the matches, but is that they ended up feeling a lot more on the grindy inevitability focus type games. What's been your view on that?
There are definitely more grindy games than in Battle for Zendikar.
You're seeing that too.
That's been my early experience. There's just more games where both players have 5 creatures in play and neither player is making a ton of headway, which means that cards with repeatable activated abilities tend to be really good in that kind of game.
Yeah, which is why I think I'm liking Cohort right now.
Yeah, Cohort's really good. I've seen Zada's Commando even in like an aggressive-ish red-green deck, right, that has like a decent amount of 2 and 3 drops, some combat tricks, and just a couple 5s. Got into a board stall, especially since the 2/3 Spider for 3 does a pretty good job of stopping
the Netcaster
flyers.
Spider, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Zada's Commando sits there and I've seen it deal 6 damage. Just off the Cohort, because sometimes you just pass back and forth. And, games that are more likely to go like this, having repeatable activated abilities, are just really, really good. Prophet of Distortion is one that this is a 1 blue for a 1/2 and has 3 in a colorless draw card.
I can't wait to play that card.
If your opponent has that, one of the people in our drafted this like Bant control deck that had a bunch of colorless cards and like Blinding Drones and Prophet of Distortion, and end up just stalling a bunch of games and just drawing a bunch of cards off Prophet.
That's great. Yeah. One of the cards that's really stood out to me along those lines as well has been Malakir Soothsayer. That's the uncommon 4 and a black 4/4 with Cohort. You draw a card and lose a life. And I've had that card on my side and I've played against it. And man, I tell you, when you hit that middle part of the game where things start to get a little stalled out and nobody's really making, any great attacks one way or the other, that Soothsayer is amazing. I mean, that thing comes down, and if you get to untap with it, you start drawing cards, and you can run away with the game with that pretty easily. Another card that caught my eye was Zulaport Chain Mage, which is one that I'm not in love with. That's the 3 and a black 4/2. It's a human shaman ally, but the Cohort ability is target opponent loses 2 life. And again, if you can get yourself to that position where nobody can really make any big headway on damage, Zulaport Chain Mage can add up a ton of damage. Zada's Commando can pile in some damage, and like I said, you can draw some cards. So I don't know if I'm overrating these because of the way that the games, the early games that I've played out, but I can tell you that the Cohort abilities, pretty much all of them so far, have really impressed me.
I'm not too high on the Chain Mage. I'm not a big fan of just the fact that it's a 4/2 for 4 makes me a little suspicious. But yeah, Cohort has been great. All the Cohort abilities have been better than I thought, and even the Chain Mage, if it's better, I didn't think much of it before, so it could still also be better than I thought, and even if I still don't love it.
Yeah, that's where I ended up on it. Is not amazing, but better. Like, I kind of thought it wasn't playable, to be honest, or that it just wouldn't end up making the cut very often. And I was like, oh, well, actually, that's going to kill me in 3 turns or whatever. Like I said, Malakir Soothsayer, though, has been the one that's really stood out to me. I think that card's great. I'm a big fan. I would take it early, and if I was in black and had any way to activate it, I would be all over that thing. It's been really impressive to me.
Yeah. Another thing that has stood out to me is that color is definitely a thing. I mean, it's not surprising, right? It's a mechanic in the set. It's one of the major like selling points, and it seems like there's going to be more than one colorless deck per table. I've seen multiple tables with like 2 to 3.
Yep, I've seen that too. I'm still lining up what the incentives are. That's the thing that I haven't figured out yet. Are what are the cards or the types of cards that really push people into playing this colorless deck? Because I haven't found that to be obvious yet. Like, is it somebody opens a colorless bomb and then they go for it? Is it just that, 2 to 4 people at the table splash a little bit for the cool colorless card that they got or the random colorless activation that they can do? That part I have not nailed down yet in my head about, where that balance lies, but I've seen the tools around. Like, you can find wastes. There's 2 different common slots for that. I think we forgot to mention that on the set review, but apparently there's, 2 within a sheet. There's 2 different wastes on a common sheet. So you'll see those twice as often as a regular common. And then there's all these, utility lands that you tend to pick up, here and there that are just better than wastes in many ways. So you see those. Have you played with or against Essence Depleter yet?
Yes, this card is quite good. This is the
card's sick.
2 and a black for a 2/3, and you pay 1 and a colorless to drain your opponent for 1.
Yeah, that card's really good. Like,
I think it is
very impressed by it.
So speaking to your point about incentives, one of the tricky parts about drafting colorless and why I don't think I have a perfect handle on it yet by any stretch is that there's 2 sides of the equation. One is the colorless sources, whether it's wastes, blighted lands, crumbling vestige, like holdout, settlement, just like all the different colorless sources, cultivator drone, Heathen Scrabbler. The other is the actual cards that care about colorless, and if you have too much of either of them, your deck's not in good shape. So figuring out where they land and how high you should be taking them is been pretty interesting. I will say that I'm not a big fan of wastes so far. Wastes have not seemed very good to me.
I agree. It feels like there's just the replacements are just better, right?
Well, the replacements are just better. Wastes are the worst. I mean,
so why do I need
how
wastes?
The cards are designed. Well, there's 2 uses for wastes. One is I've had decks where you play 1 waste and then a way to search for it, or 2 ways to search for it. Like, if you have one of the cards that searches for basics like Evolving Wilds or Natural Connection or what have you. So they're having a waste is upside because it just gives you an extra colorless source. 2 extra, 1 from the waste, 1 from whatever you're searching. The other is that if you just don't find the other sources, like, yes, you'd clearly rather have, holdout settlements or blighted lands or whatever, or, even crumbling vestige is I think generally better. But if you don't get those, wastes do make up for that. So wastes are okay there. But
they're like the fallback plan, not plan A.
Yeah.
I mean, is that what you're saying?
Yes. I think that a lot of good colorless deck will have 0 or 1 wastes in them. And it's just going to depend on what you see in the card in the particular draft. But I'm not taking wastes very early. I felt like there was more colorless sources than colorless cards. Mm-hmm. Like cards that require actual colorless, which is good because, if you have 4 colorless sources and 1 colorless card, that plays a lot better than the reverse where you have 4 cards that need colorless and only 1 source. So I think that intentionally the set has more sources than it does cards, or at least the abundance is there. Mm-hmm. So I have not felt like I had to prioritize colorless sources. Like, I felt like I'm pretty safe. Like, one of the decks I drafted was pretty heavy colorless, and I felt pretty safe taking, a bunch of colorless cards early and then getting the sources later. It did not feel like if you first pick, like I first picked Endbringer. This is the 5 in a colorless 5/5 that does everything. It taps to deal 1 damage. It untaps during your opponent's untap step. You can pay a colorless and tap it to make a creature unable to attack or block. And you can pay 2 colorless and tap it to draw a card. Like, I first picked that card and then never felt like I was in danger of not being able to cast it. Like,
did you have to prioritize these things, or were these cards that you maybe would have played anyway?
Well, I prioritized Heathen Scrabbler and Cultivator Drone because those cards are just awesome. But I didn't have to prioritize wastes. Like, I wheeled 1 waste, so I ended up with a 1 blighted land. I ended up with 2 holdout settlements. Like, it did not feel like I had to sacrifice card quality drastically to get the sources. So
okay, well, that's good news. I agree with you too. That I think that's like very good news for the set. If they made these colorless cards not like too hard to play, then it's a real loss, right?
basically, I never saw anyone, including myself, have a deck where they had colorless cards but just didn't have enough sources and had to leave the cards out. It was more like,
that's great.
do you have the incentives? If you do, then you go get the lands. Because I think that's the other thing is if there's not a ton of reasons to have colorless. I mean, there are plenty, but they're not like they're not 3 in every pack. Then maybe only 2 people at the table actually care about colorless. Like someone might be drafting a like devoid deck that cares about colorless creatures, but they don't care about the actual colorless symbols. So you're not really competing with them for colorless in terms of the mana sources.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
So it has seemed pretty good to me. And so the cards that really impressed me, and the reason I think that a lot of the colorless decks are going to be blue is those cards I named before, Cultivator Drone and then also Blinding Drone.
Yep.
Basically, Cultivator Drone gives you a great way to add colorless, and you can actually play it and be happy with it in a deck that has a lot of devoid cards, even if you don't strictly care about colorless, like the symbol. And Blinding Drone is just a great reason to want colorless. It's just a really powerful card. It's also a 2-mana 1/3 that you can almost always cast if you're just a blue deck.
Yep.
And you don't need to find the colorless till 3 or 4 turns later, which is hugely powerful.
Yeah, that's really powerful. You know, the delineation that I keep making in my head between when it comes to the colorless spells are really deciding if my deck is the one that just needs a couple of one-off colorless mana available so that I can cast a colorless spell that doesn't have any activated ability, but just I need to get it on the battlefield like a bomb of some sort, or one that has like a kicker style effect attached to it where it says like when you cast this you can pay a colorless and then you get something bonus, versus cards like Blinding Drone that require me to have repeatable consistent sources of colorless mana. I think that those two decks look a lot different as far as what you actually want from your mana base. One of them has a much higher bar and requires you to, pick cards a little bit differently and build your deck a little bit differently if you're going to have those repeatable colorless needs. But if you just need to cast a card that has colorless in its mana cost and that's it, Spatial Contortion or something along those lines, I think that's actually pretty easy to get. A Scion does the job, and there's a few other cards that you'd probably play anyway that can get the job done for you. So keep that in mind too. I don't think that your colorless needs are always going to be the same. It's going to kind of depend on, what you're actually trying to do.
And on that note, Hedron Crawler, the 2-mana 0/1 that taps for a colorless, I think is a very high pick.
I have been super impressed by that card.
So there are a couple reasons why I think that you should be happy taking this early. One is that if you do end up needing the actual colorless sources, it's one of the best ways to do it because you can always cast it and it comes out early.
Mm-hmm.
The other is that unless you end up in an aggro deck, you just want this card in your deck. Like the average like mid-range to control deck should just want this card. A 2-mana accelerant that can chump block later, that's a great card. It really is.
It really pulls.
There's also a lot of good 4 and 5 mana cards, so just playing one on turn 3 is absurd. So it's really safe to take this because it's a colorless card. Like it costs 2 generic to cast. You can put it in any deck. Again, unless you're like low curve aggro. But that's still, it means that if you first pick Hedron Color, right? Let's say you have a pack where you have to first pick this card. You've got to be 85% to play it?
Yeah,
for
sure.
If not higher. Because even some aggro decks would play this card. Not all of them, but if a deck that actually has a good curve but also has 4s and 5s, maybe you'll play this. Maybe that's not aggro. I don't know. But either way, you're really likely to play this card, and it's really likely to be one of your better cards, especially if you're in the devoid/colorless theme. So I think Hedron Color is one of the best ways to get into colorless because if you take this, then you feel a lot better about taking those Spatial Contortions or Blinding Drones that you see.
Yeah. I echo those sentiments. Kozilek's Translator has been good for me as well in these slowdown type decks. That's the 4 and a black 3/5, where you can pay a life to add a colorless to your mana pool.
The one that's dragging itself across the carpet. Bad dog.
As a cat owner, yes. That is the one.
Yeah, this card's good. It's a little tricky to play with. I have felt it's a little brain burny where you just have to always be aware that if you have an instant, you need to pay a life to keep a mana untapped. Then on their turn, you can pay a life and tap that mana, so you essentially get an extra mana out of the activation. Yeah, I mean, it's a great card though. You're going to play it in your black decks. It's a 5-mana 3/5. That's also a solid body.
One of the decks that stood out to me at the Super Sunday series, at least from the players talking, and also it happened to be the same colors that Sam used to win to win the tournament, or two of the colors, I should say, that Sam used to win the tournament was black-white.
I like black-white. Yeah,
it seems to be an early standout deck in the format, at least so far. Real early, but still.
It's got a lot of the same themes as Battle for Zendikar, which is an advantage, right? Because let's say you're something like Landfall, right? That's the Battle for Zendikar deck.
Yeah.
In Oath of the Gatewatch, there's not much support for that. There's no Landfall cards. So you're not really going to draft a Landfall deck because your red-green deck might play McKindy Slide Runner or Valakut Predator in the deck, but you're not ever going to be like, well, I need to pick up Mana Ramp and other like instant speed getting lands into play to make my Landfall deck work because it's just a one-set theme. Black-White has a lot of overlap between the two sets, which means that your Colostria Healers and your Bloodbound Vampires fit perfectly into the Black-White cards from Oath of the Gatewatch. It's a continuation of the theme, which makes it a lot stronger.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that.
And yeah, the Ondu War Cleric, the cohort gain 2 life, Vampire Envoy, like these cards are really good. Vampire Envoy especially, I think, is just a great card.
It's been really
good. 2 and a black, 1/4 flyer when it becomes tapped to gain a life.
Yeah.
I think this card is just a very high pick.
It's
Even
an
if
ally.
you don't end up, it's an ally. Even if you don't end up in a life gain deck or an allies deck, you still just want this in your black decks.
I agree.
It's kind of like a 3 and a 1/4 flying lifelink, and it might be better than that because when you tap it to cohort, you gain a life.
Yeah, it's been really impressive. Just again, a lot of these matches have played out in a very stalled out, sort of blocky style fashion, and that thing is definitely contributes to that happening. It just sits there in the air and just puts up a brick wall and gives you advantage for it on the times when you can attack or cohort with it.
And when you combine all these cards together, you have this really good controlling black-white deck. It sometimes has life gain as a theme. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just has life gain cards in it, like the War Cleric or the Envoy or whatever. And that's fine. You don't always need to have like a strong theme, but the overall control sentiment is there. It also, both black and white have a common 4-mana exile a creature card.
That's true.
Really,
wow,
that's
you snap
really good.
up all of those. Yeah, that's a good point.
It just makes your deck much better at playing the defensive long game and grinding your opponent out. Like you said, the 5-mana 4/4 that taps to draw a card and lose a life sounds great in this deck. Mm-hmm. You've got the cards from set 1 that combine with it, like your Bloodbound Vampires or Colostria Healers. Like I drafted Black-White Control once and was very happy with it. I've seen other people draft these like multiple Colostria Healer decks. It's hard to get multiples of the set 1 cards now because Battle for Zendikar is only 1 pack, but it is possible, especially since not that many other people are going to be competing with you for them.
Right. Those are the ones that if you look back at Battle for Zendikar, the Colostria Healers went into 1 deck and that was it. And that's still true. So yeah, that deck seems to be pretty impressive to me. Have you had a chance to play with Dwar Isle Avenger much? That's the 3/3 flying for 4 and a blue with Surge 2 and a blue.
Yeah, I like the card. The deck I've enjoyed the most was that Pyromancer Assault deck that was a red-blue kind of like Surge.
Oh, yeah, I got to hear about
Pyromancer
Assault too.
And I had Dwar Isle Avenger in that deck, and it was good. It wasn't like, it didn't feel broken. It's not a 3-mana 3/3 flyer, as in you get to play it on turn 3, but it's a card that let you like play like a Tightening Coils and play that on turn 5, which is still a good turn. So yeah, Pyromancer Assault. So it's funny, I started it in my sideboard, mostly because my teammates were skeptical, but I started it a lot because I found that I had a very controlling deck. I had multiple Ancient Crabs, the 3-mana 1/5s.
Yep. Shields up.
I had multiple Roiling Waters, the 7-mana bounce 2, draw 2. I had a Crush
I've already played a deck with 2 of those in it.
Oh yeah, I had a Crush of Tentacles.
Oh, you had it?
Yeah, and I think Crush of Tentacles is great.
I want a full report on that
6-mana bounce everything, Surge, 5-mana bounce everything, put 8/8 into play.
Yeah.
It's more like a around 7-mana card, maybe 6 if you're lucky. But it's still just so good. You play that and your opponent's just on the back foot so much because you've got an 8/8 in play. They frequently are going to play something and then chump with your 8/8. In this deck especially, I got to go play a 2-mana spell or a 1-mana spell, play Crush. Next turn they play 2 creatures again, and then I go Roiling Waters, attack you for 8, and that's almost just game. So,
that's pretty good sequence.
But Pyromancer Assault worked out well in my deck, and honestly, I think my deck was also not the best version of this deck because
were you running a bunch of cheap cantrippy stuff?
I didn't have very many.
Oh.
That was the problem. Is I only had 1 Expedite. I didn't have a Slip Through Space. But what I did have is I had a bunch of different draw 2s. I had Comparative Analysis to draw 2. This is the 4-mana Surge 3-mana draw 2 cards.
Mm-hmm.
I had Coastal Discovery, Waking Battle. I had 2 copies of Roiling Waters and a lot of defensive creatures. So what I would frequently do is just play a bunch of defensive stuff and build up and just cast a couple draw twos and then go Pyromancer Assault and let's play 2 spells a turn for a number of turns.
I see, but this was deep in the late game then.
Yeah, though
like you would set up your mana and all that.
A turn 4 Pyromancer Assault was also really good. I frequently went turn 4 Assault and then activated over the next 2 turns.
Oh, okay. Well, that's pretty good.
I think the card's quite a bit better than Molten Nursery. It's not hard to activate. Also, if you have like 5 mana, you can play Assault and then play one of the 1 mana cantrips and immediately trigger it. So
right, yeah, it counts itself.
Doesn't wait. And this segues into my next point, which is I would have played a Bonesaw in this deck.
Really?
Yeah,
a Bonesaw?
I had a lot of search cards and a Pyromancer Assault, and
oh my god!
Have you ever seen an Ancient Crowd come at you with a Bonesaw? It is it doubles its power.
Shelley with a Bonesaw.
It's a 0 mana equipment that doubles the power of multiple of your creatures. I mean, it's just true. But
that is true.
All right, so here's the thing about Bonesaw.
Tell me about Bonesaw, because go ahead.
Bonesaw's okay.
Is it?
It really is. It's not great. You shouldn't go nuts over it. You should often not play it. This is not me giving you carte blanche to play Bonesaw and put it in your deck. Don't think you're hearing that. It's better than we thought. It definitely is better than we thought. There is an aggressive red-white deck that I've seen multiple times. Matt Nass drafted it, and it was quite good. He had, Weapons Trainer, the 2-mana 3/2 that if you control an equipment, all your creatures get +1/+. So it's also good on the multiple first strikers in red-white. Also, Phil Yam, he's a Northern California player who's been to a couple pro tours and plays a ton of limited. He's a very aggressive drafter. I'm sure you've talked to him many times. And I
have on Twitter, yeah. Yeah,
on Twitter. He's very active on Twitter. And I was talking to him on Twitter, and he said he's drafted Bonesaw a bunch of times in his red-white decks, and it's been very good. So,
God, how can that be? What does it do?
So, there are multiple things. It lets you surge out your Goblin Freeblade. This is the 4-mana, 3/2 menace that surges for 2 mana.
Yeah, that guy's
surging that out on turn 2 is a beating, because if you play that on turn 2, let's say you play it turn 2 on the play, it's going to get in 3 times before your opponent can block it.
Yeah, or if it's a Bonesaw.
And you have a Bonesaw, so often when they do assemble 2 creatures, it kills both of them. There's multiple equipment, creatures that care about equipment. Also, if you have, the worse your creatures are, the better Bonesaw is relatively, right? Because it makes your creatures more effective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just does enough to be worth including. Again, I'm not saying first pick Bonesaw or fifth pick Bonesaw, but I'm saying these decks might want a couple Bonesaws.
Okay, so we should keep our eye out for the exact right deck that would want one. Right. Now, you mentioned it in conjunction with your deck. Did you play it?
No, I didn't have one.
You didn't have one. Okay.
What I'm saying is I would have played it because I had, first of all, the synergy with Crush is very good. It makes that exactly 5 mana.
Yeah, that is pretty decent.
And look, I'm not saying this card's great because if you combine it with a mythic rare. Yeah. The other is I had Pyromancer Assault, so some of the time Bonesaw is going to be a 0 mana deal too. And I had a lot of creatures with low power. So again, taking a creature with 1 power to 2 power is way more relevant than taking a 3 power creature to 4 power.
Sure.
So, because it just increases the range of creatures it can kill by so much more.
Tell you what, somebody's going to have to kill me with a goddamn Bonesaw.
Look,
I'm not doing it until I get killed by a Bonesaw.
Again, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm not saying Bonesaw is a great card. I'm saying that there are some decks that want it. Like, we came in very low on the Bonesaw. I did too in my written review.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to admit there's room for growth here, and some decks will want it. I still think the card's going to be largely overplayed. I believe that the average person who puts a Bonesaw in their deck would be better off not putting a Bonesaw into their deck.
Okay.
But I'm also saying that this isn't like when it showed up in it was in Shards block, I believe. That card was just stone unplayable. You should never have it in your deck. That's not true here. I think there are actually enough things going on that want Bonesaw that, Bonesaw's in there. Tomoharu Saito has been posting tons of decks on Twitter. Again, these are the resources I look at to kind of broaden my knowledge, even though I'm not getting to draft 50 times. And he's had Bonesaw on a lot of decks. So I'm not saying it's good, but he seems to like it.
Okay. Well, I'll keep our eye on it. Baloth Null Drifter
lives up to its name.
Yeah, it's been fantastic.
It's a great card. It's also
we knew it was going to be really good, and I've seen it as a complement to the black-white decks that people will splash a green for a Baloth Null Drifter because, hey, if you're going to stall out the ground and try to grind, hey, you want one of these things in your deck, and it's been really impressive. Yeah,
the card is great.
I've seen it splashed actually in 2 different decks, and like I said, I got to watch a decent amount of drafts, but not a ton. I saw it. In fact, the two people that splashed it were Sam Black and Reed Duke. And Sam splashed it in a black-white deck.
Well, I mean, this doesn't surprise me from either player.
Right, and Reed splashed it in a green-red aggro deck. He made a trade that I was surprised, or he let a creature get eaten to get in for some damage, and I was surprised he did that. I was playing against him, and I was like, wow, something's going on here. But he couldn't cast a Baloth Nuldra. I mean, it wasn't even on my radar at all. And then he goes swamp Baloth Nuldra. I'm like, no way. And he's just like, pick up these 2 5-drops, go. And I'm like, holy crap, that's huge. And obviously the 4/5, is a big deal on the board too. So, we knew it, but I did have a chance to play against it already, and it was great.
Speaking of 4/5s, Tajuru Pathward on the 5/4, Vigilance Trample for 5.
Yep.
Yeah, great card.
Thumbs up. It's been super good.
It does its job. The fact that it's Trample just means that when your opponent does commit to blocking it and you have a trick or a removal spell, you just get to knock them for like 4 or 5 points of damage, which is awesome.
I'm surprised it's not 3 toughness. Well. Yeah. Like common, like if it was an uncommon, whatever, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was a 5/3 with vigilance, just so that you kind of get in once and it often trades. But the 4 is like, that can be 2 creatures pretty easily that you have to put in front of it. And, you're really taking on a lot of risk by doing that. And that thing smashes every turn with vigilance. It just crushes. So yeah, I've been really impressed by that too.
Yeah. Look at this rampant power creep. I've been doing a couple, here and there, Mirrodin, Darksteel, 5th Dawn drafts. Yeah. Or I guess Mirrodin, Darksteel now, 5th Dawn next week. But, that block. Yeah. And when Fangren Hunter came out, that's 3 green for a 4/4 trample. That was kind of a big deal.
Oh, it was?
Yeah. This is now 4 and a green for a 5/4 vigilance trample. It's just
and it's like middle of the pack type card.
Look,
all right.
5 mana in 2003 does not have the same buying power in 2000.
No, inflation has hit even the mana symbols of Magic. Okay, I've got a really important irrelevant question for you.
I love irrelevant questions.
So we had this discussion with a few different people. Best card in the set. Okay, here's your 3 choices. Now, if you have another one that you'd rather put in, feel free. But we have it as Kalitas, whatever his name is. Kalitas, Linvala, and Chandra.
Okay, that's what I figured the choices were. I think I'd rather have Kalitas. I think that's the one if I had to open a guy to choose to open a card, I think it would be Kalitas.
Sweet. That was my answer too, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little controversial, but I think I sold them
cards so far. So
yeah, I haven't played it. I played with Chandra and Sealed, and she was absolutely fantastic. So
yeah,
I mean look,
all these cards
and the reason why I said this is irrelevant, somewhat jokingly, but also true, is that they're all rare, mythic rare, so you won't have to make this choice effectively ever. But it is interesting thought, discussion and thought exercise to say, well, which one of these is actually the best? Because Chandra has this really cool thing of having the abilities kind of lined up with the different board states that you're going to be in, ahead, behind, and at parity. And Linvala is, we called it one of the best limited cards we've ever seen in the set review. And I stand by that. This is the type of card that can very quickly take you from being pretty significantly behind to actually ahead on board, which is, there's so few cards in the history of Magic that get you that big of a swing. And even the ones that get you from behind to parity are often A. those are often A level cards. But Kalitas is one that, really stood out to me because both of the other 2 cost 6 mana and Kalitas costs 4.
That's kind of my thinking, is that if you play Kalitas on turn 4 and it doesn't get removed, you're just going to win the game. But it's also just great on like turn 10.
Yeah, totally.
It also blocks really well. If you're like able to make some like even bad trades, you'll get some 2/2s. Also, Kalitas can eat the 2/2s to become a 5/6 or a 7/8.
Yep.
Can also eat your other random vampires that are lying around or flying around, as it were. So
yeah.
I mean,
it's just funny because when we talk about the 6 drops, we're like, oh, well, they get you back from when you're behind. But if you have Kalitas on turn 4, you're not getting behind.
the biggest downside is that Kalitas interacts the most poorly with removal. So maybe that is there's two common removal spells that kill Kalitas mean that Chandra's a better pick, actually. I don't know.
That could be. That totally could be. And I mean, again, I think that this is more thought exercise than strategic discussion, right? Like, you won't have to make these choices, but it is interesting to think about. I think the thing that it's easy to overlook here, and we mentioned it, but is the casting cost, though, right? Like the fact that there's some percentage of games where you get to play Kalitas and you never get a chance to play Linval or Chandra because, hey, sometimes you mulligan to 5 and you don't hit your 6th land drop until turn 11 or whatever, right? That happens in Magic. And the times when you have Kalitas, you're going to be like, play it, and now you've got a really legitimate chance of winning that game, assuming that Kalitas survives. And and you would lose those games if you were staring at Linvala, just praying for that 6th mana off the top of your deck. So that is tangible. That is valuable. If they all cost 4 mana, that's a different discussion. I don't know. It would probably be Linvala at that point, I guess, just because it closes out the game in such a crazy way. But anyway, I wanted to throw that one at you, Luis, because I thought it was an interesting discussion, or at least like a thought exercise, like I said. Anything else jump out to you about the set? Was there any other cards or any other interactions that you saw? We'll, of course, continue to touch on these things as we move forward into the set, but I want to give you a chance just in case you had any other ones in your head.
No, that was pretty much what I have for right now. I think next week is going to be quite different because I'll be jamming as soon as it's on Magic Online. Let's just say a lot of drafts, maybe at the same time. So I'll have a way more complete picture of the format, which, it's interesting to go through it. So
yeah, you and I both. I'm doing some work research on Wednesday, doing some drafts to get ready for the GP this weekend in Vancouver, and that's limited. And I'm going to be doing coverage, and so I'll be drafting there with that, and then of course covering an entire GP worth, talking to all the pros. So next week we'll definitely have a lot of thoughts and a much more clear picture. This is very much initial impressions of the format, but by the time we get another week and a half under our belt with going to a GP, practicing for the Pro Tour for you, and me prepping for PT coverage and GP coverage, I think we're going to have a much more clear picture as well.
Agreed.
All right. Well, that will do it for our show this week. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can also find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. You can find, links to our streams and Facebook page, YouTube channel, all that kind of stuff. Right on the front page there, along with every episode and the blog I mentioned before. I want to remind you that Limited Resources is brought to you by channelfireball.com. Make sure you head on over there if you need to pick up any Oath of the Gatewatch product. It's all in stock now. And if you're planning on heading out to GP Houston, check out gphouston.com to pre-register and find out any information that you might need about the Grand Prix in about a month's time. All right, that's going to do it for the show this week. Thanks so much for hanging out, and we'll talk to you next week.
Marshall, do you know what 2 truths and a lie is?
No.
It's a game where I tell you 3 things. 2 of them are true and 1 of them is false, and you have to pick which one is false.
Oh, I'm really good at these.
All right. So the first category is kind of like general Pro Tour shenanigans.
Oh, this is going to be good.
All right. So 1, a guy at my local shop went to Pro Tour Tokyo. He played a very short game 1.
Okay.
He then won a very long game 2, and then lost a very long game 3. His opponent then said, "We better hurry up and play, otherwise we're not going to finish game 3."
Okay.
All right, that's the first story.
Okay.
My friend then played game 3, which is really game 4,
again,
and won the match and got away with it. So that's the first story.
Okay.
Also, if true, that is cheating, by the way. So I'm not endorsing it. But
right.
A Grand Prix finals was once delayed to the 4th quarter of the Super Bowl could resolve.
Okay.
That's number 2. And the third one is Frank Karsten once scribbled a complicated equation that included branching probability trees in order to figure out his next play at the Pro Tour.
Oh my God, that's great. So I'm picking the one that's false, right?
Well, 2 of them are true. I guess you can pick the 2 true ones if you want.
No, I'll pick the one that's false. I'm going to say the middle one, the delayed for Super Bowl thing.
Well, you were at that Grand Prix. That was Grand Prix San Jose.
Did we delay it?
Yes.
I was watching the Super Bowl.
I
thought you guys were on the air.
You picked the one that you were actually there for.
But I didn't know it was delayed. I was watching it myself.
Well, this has already exceeded expectations.
This is really great.
The finals of Grand Prix San Jose was in fact delayed so that the Super Bowl we could watch more of the Super Bowl. I personally didn't care, but
wow, I did because the Seahawks were in it getting just so. Okay, I'll digress. So which one was wrong then? Or false?
Frank Karsten has not, in fact, done a complicated equation that included branching probability trees.
That was my shoe-in.
He has, in fact, done that, though. I've seen him calculating things on paper during his match. It was with Affinity. I think it looked very complicated.
The good doctor.
Yes. The second category involves my second greatest skill.
Trolling?
No, that doesn't even I barely troll. Puns? Anyway, the first of these supposed truths or fact. I once ate an 8-pound burrito.
Okay.
The second one is I once made a bet that I could eat 20 malasadas. These are stuffed Portuguese donuts.
Oh, those ones from in Hawaii.
And the third one is I ordered and enjoyed a tobacco and whiskey dessert.
Oh my God, this is a good one. Now I'm really just trying to hope that I wasn't there for any of these two.
Yeah, try not to say that something is false when you were literally there.
Yeah, I didn't know. I actually had no idea about that.
I was trying to give you a gimmick.
Yeah, no, I get it now, but I didn't know we did that. Oh man, 8 pound. I'm gonna say you've never eaten an 8-pound burrito.
So. The one that is false is that I never made a bet that I could eat 20 malasadas.
I tried. Did do it?
Nobody would bet me. I literally tried to bet Bennis $1,000. He almost did, but he's like, "No, you're going to enjoy this too much. You just want to do this."
That's great. So you ate an 8-pound burrito?
So that's what it was billed at. I do not believe that it was actually 8 pounds.
It didn't. So, its fighting weight wasn't quite 8 pounds.
That's what it said on the menu. It was a challenge. I was there at just at Grand Prix Atlanta with a lot of people that you know.
I hope it was free if you ate the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, in any case, that I'm going to consider that one mostly true because on the menu it said that. But all right, you didn't do too poorly. You went 0 for 2.
I 0 for 2'd and named one that I was there.
All right.